Hello, this is Russell Moore, and you're listening to The Russell Moore Show, brought to you by Christianity Today. Every week, we explore here conversations and questions from a Christian perspective to help you sort out how to live as a follower of Jesus in confusing times. And this week, we have a conversation to seek to do just that. Years ago, I was talking to someone in a church who, before he had become a Christian, was a roadside psychic, and who said, it's really easy to do because you basically want to do one of two things to have a repeat customer. What you want to do is to talk about things really positively. There's something amazing about to happen in your future, or you want to talk catastrophically. Something really awful is about to happen unless you listen to me. And as this person was explaining it, I said, I know exactly that dynamic because I've listened to Christian talk radio for all of my life. And the same sort of grift often shows up in Christian circles. I think there were a lot of people who, if they were observing that conversation, would think that both of those things, his former psychic life and my Christian life, were both going away. And that's not true. Our guest today is going to be telling us why we're living in what he argues is a more superstitious time than we have had in our lifetimes in the past. And I'm really excited about this. Michael Horton is a scholar. He's a Reformed theologian, minister, and he's a J. Gresham Machen Professor of Systematic Theology and Apologetics at Westminster Seminary, California. He founded Sola Media, and they have the White Horse Inn radio show and podcast, which I was listening to as a college and seminary student in my car back in the days when they were tapes. Today, I want to talk about his new book, part of a series. Is really a deep scholarly look at what has happened, called Shaman and Sage: The Roots of Spiritual but Not Religious in Antiquity. Mike Horton, thanks for being with us.
Russell Moore, it's great to be with you. Thanks for that intro.
Why would you say that we're not losing superstition? I think there are a lot of people who are saying, we have secularization going on, which means people are going to become more rational, more scientific. They're going to lose supernatural beliefs and become more rational and so forth. And you don't think that's the case?
No, statistically, this is what blew me away. That's just not the case. Actually, the more people move away from organized religion into this sort of spiritual but not religious category, the more superstitious they become. The more, for example, the more quote unquote secularized we become, the younger generations believe that astrology is scientific.
Hmm.
Now, you can give evidence for design in creation. You get evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and their eyes glaze over. But
Yeah.
people who really are increasingly not even being raised in the church or any kind of organized religion, they are becoming more superstitious, not less. It's not really a secularization as much as a de-Christianization of our
Huh.
culture.
So you can see that with, say, horoscopes and maybe in a kind of general view of karma and
Yeah.
consequences.
Yeah, even hear Christians talk about, well, it's coming back to me. You get back what you give out. Or you hear, the way people talk about, I don't know if there's a personal God, but I certainly believe that there is a force out there that's larger than me.
Yeah.
That kind of worldview is what has fascinated me for many years now, studying it. How sort of the whole Western tradition has evolved with this schizophrenia. On one hand, we are rationalists, and on the other hand, we're mystics. And both of those conspire to push out biblical Christianity, which is opposed to both worldviews.
Mhm.
And that's, it goes back to C.S. Lewis and the materialist magician.
Mm.
We're by day rationalists, not allowing any thoughts of a transcendent God to come into our view, and by night playing with Ouija boards or transhumanism.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, in just a minute. When somebody says, you say a typical sort of kid who grew up in the church says to somebody, "I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm a nun, no religious affiliation, but I'm spiritual but not religious." What does he or she typically mean by that?
Well, that's what I wanted to. I didn't want to just make generalizations. I wanted to actually look at whatever I could find in the questions that were asked, the data that was compiled from interviews, and I found just a consistent response, and that is very much this worldview of I'm not sure that I believe in a personal God. I'm not sure that I believe in a God who is outside of me, who created me, who judges me, who saves me. I'm not sure about heaven and hell and all of these particular things, but I think that there is a love in the universe that surrounds me. I think that there is a force that is larger than all of us put together that runs through all things.
Is this starting as intellectual idea phase in the academy and then filtering its way down to people? Or is it going the other way? I can see the argument for it coming from pop culture, kind of the Force and Star Wars, Oprah Winfrey, manifest your what you want, those kinds of things, and coming up from the grassroots. Which way do you see that coming?
Mhm. I can't answer that, but I think that from my perspective, what we're seeing is both top down and bottom up. Take, for example, Gnosticism. If you had suggested that there would be a whole cottage industry in the academy and in popular culture devoted to fascination with third century Christian cult,
Mm.
that probably would have just baffled scholars and certainly Christians in previous generations. Also, I have been astounded by how much interest there is in hermeticism,
Mhm.
magic, especially in online games
Mm.
and in movies. I've been introduced by my kids to anime, and it's amazing. I go through a lot of this stuff in class at seminary. And now I have students in class who say, "Oh, now I can understand that anime series that I know almost by heart." We had an evening, Russell, over at my house for my class where some of the students wanted to put together a series of the sort of best of anime shows that mentioned the same people I did in class in my
Mm.
lectures. And I was blown away. So now we have young people growing up, and many of them have grown up in the church. And there's nothing wrong with anime, but who have grown up with this kind of as the background noise. And
Mm.
it's not the background noise of Christianity as much these days for the younger generations as it is this sort of fascination with magic and witchcraft. Wicca is the fastest growing religion in America right now.
Really?
uh, yeah, astonishing. And then you go back in history and you realize, well, Mormonism kind of grew out of Masonic rites, and Joseph Smith was fascinated with magic and hermeticism with Gnostic sources. Then you keep going back and back and back, and you realize this is so deep in our culture. This is nothing new. This is actually something that has been very deep in Western culture all along, an alternative, quote unquote, Christianity to traditional Orthodox theism.
I imagine there's somebody listening who would say, I kind of know what Gnosticism is, but I don't know what hermeticism is, or vice versa. Could you tell us what those terms mean?
I'll do my best.
Okay.
Yeah, Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. That's why it's Trismegistus in Latin. The thrice great Hermes was believed to have been the priest, magician, theologian, lawgiver of ancient Egypt. And so he took on this huge persona, not only in the Egyptian world, but in the Greek world. And he was believed to have been the source, really, of all Western myths and philosophy, magic, so forth. And so it was called hermeticism after him, Hermes Trismegistus. And in the second and third centuries, in Alexandria in Egypt, which was at that time far outpaced Athens as the capital, the intellectual capital of the empire, in Alexandria you had Christians, Gnostics, and Hermeticists all mixing and mingling and sometimes migrating from group to group. And out of this kind of mixture, you had a really fascinating convergence of what today we would call something like New Age and Christianity and Judaism. They're all there together. It was not until 1610 when the Calvinist philologist Isaac Casaubon from Geneva determined that these were not ancient texts from Egypt. These Hermetic writings were actually written by heretical Christians in the second century. It blew up, but amazingly, you still had people who were totally committed to the truth of the Hermetic doctrines, even though that they knew the history wasn't there. And it's amazing how people will hold on to, whether it's Joseph Smith and South America, Jesus showing up in South America, or, how long people will hold on to things after they know that it's historically a fraud. The scientific revolution was one of the central debates of the early scientific enterprise was a debate over hermeticism and natural philosophy.
That's interesting you bring that up. There's you talked about anime. There's a graphic novel series called The Department of Truth. Really in the background is a real historical figure, Jack Parsons, I think is his name, who was the inventor of rocket technology in California, who was in a group with L. Ron Hubbard of Scientology and was deeply into all kinds of occultism and magic. I
Yeah.
wonder how much of the draw to this kind of thing has to do with the way people tend to be fascinated by secret societies. You talked about even after something's been proven not to be true, usually the response is, well, that's what they want you to think. And so there's kind of a sense of belonging. I know
Mm-hmm.
something that other people don't know, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
part of a group that other people can't see.
Yeah, that's very much a part of this phenomenon, secrecy. I mean, we think of somebody like Pythagoras, for example, in 6th century BCE, really the founder, the first major philosopher who then leads to Socrates and Plato. Pythagoras lectured behind a screen to what was, in effect, his cult. Select few, a select colony of followers living in a monastery-like commune and listening to him behind. These are the ones who actually could. The rest, the masses, the crowd, tried to get in, but they weren't judged insiders enough. Once you really became an insider, you could actually stand outside of the screen and just see his shadow through a curtain, and he would deliver his oracles. This is one of the major founders of Western philosophy. And he introduced reincarnation to the West. I mean, So we would maybe typically think of him today as a religious leader, maybe even a cult leader. Now, with this new philosophy, people want to escape all of these bonds, including the bonds of the body. And this idea emerges that, the goal of salvation is to I deep in my inmost self, I am divine.
Mhm.
I'm a spark, I have a spark of divinity in here, but it's all imprisoned in flesh. And the same is true of the world at large. The world has a divine force all throughout it, but then this heavy matter kind of weighs it down. I got to escape the body and this visible world. That idea never would have occurred to people before this revolution because they were perfectly happy being embedded, connected with people they knew. Now you have this individualism, this, hey, my divine self has to realize itself and get outside of all these bonds. If I could just get outside of society, get outside this body, I could just embrace, this is happening not only in Greece, but it's coming to Greece actually from India and Egypt and Iran, the Persian Empire. And it's really around the 6th century BC where you have this major transition. And what we're seeing right now, I believe, Russell, is just one of those zigs and zags, a zag away from, once again, away from a kind of embedded Christendom where the innocent divine spark within each individual wants to fly away. And that's spirituality without religion.
When I think about shamanism, that you're talking about in this book, I have a theory, that I wanna test out on you
Yeah.
as to one of the reasons why we're seeing the spiritual but not religious phenomenon going on. And that is in the '80s and '90s, there were basically 2 ways to really grow a church. One of those ways was to talk about Bible prophecy and to say, I can show you from Ezekiel how Gog and Magog represents the Soviet Union and how the locusts in Revelation are helicopters and when the temple's going to be rebuilt and so forth. You can draw a crowd that way. Hal Lindsey, sort of late Great Planet Earth stuff.
Mhm.
Or you can grow a crowd by talking very practically about marriage and parenting, things that everybody's dealing with, and saying, we can show you how to do that. It seems to me that right now, that has been thoroughly secularized. So you can have all of the prophecy charts just in conspiracy theories that you can pass back and forth
Yep.
from whatever perspective you have across social media. And you can have a life coach when
Mhm.
it comes to the practical stuff. And that leaves a longing for some kind of meaning that there are entrepreneurs out there who are willing to sell.
Yep. If the church just focuses on imminent concerns, there are other people who can do that better. If the church just focuses on therapeutic wellness and family life and how to have your best life now and all that, politics. If the church just focuses on our happiness, our prosperity, or our power here and now, there you don't need the church for that. And I, arguably, you know this better than I do. A lot of people who say they're evangelicals don't even go to church. Their party is their church, or their ideology, or their well, that's secular too.
Mhm.
I think we've got to get out of the idea that it's only New Age. This kind of attitude I'm talking about is so much broader than the New Age movement. It's so much broader than this is civilization wide, and it's been with us for a long time. So you have, for example, groups that would have been considered fundamentalists in the 19th century, not Bible believing Christians, but would have been considered, very committed to their religion that were actually mind science cults and very heavily influenced by what's called theosophy.
I wonder if you have noticed with the religious but not or spiritual but not religious phenomenon right now, that there seems to be a difference between what, generally speaking, of course, there are all kinds of exceptions, but generally speaking, if a young woman says she's spiritual but not religious, it usually is more likely to be kind of gender fluidity, non-binary, that sort of mentality. And if a young man is spiritual but not religious, often that is somebody who's in a really hyper masculine, almost Viking kind of Nietzschean reality. Power is the way to go,
Thor,
and
yeah.
yeah, Andrew Tate and
Mhm.
the mistreatment of women. Have you seen that? Or are there differences, generally speaking, between the way males and females appropriate some of this stuff?
Mm. I can't say on the stats for that. I haven't investigated that, but very very definitely, I think that the issue with particularly, and I'm not sure that it's gender specific, but the 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 whole business of, for instance, gender fluidity, and I'm not talking about people who are struggling with gender dysphoria, other things that I think we have to treat on a case by case, understand what people are going through. But the ideology of gender fluidity and transgenderism and so forth, what is that at its root? We can talk about very important aspects of it. We can certainly scratch the surface, but I think if we want to really understand this phenomenon, even something like that, we have to understand the disdain for the body in our culture that runs very, very deep. We may have obsessions with our body in terms of how it looks, how it
Mhm.
appears, how we present ourselves, how we're loved, and we might have gym memberships, but really when it comes down to it, we don't believe that our bodies are part of our nature. We don't believe we have a created nature. We believe that our bodies are prisons of this gender neutral divine self within, and that's the real me. And what we
Mm.
have to help people with, I think, to understand this and not just be reactionary, is to help them understand. No, your embodiedness encodes who you are. That is, we don't believe that salvation is going to heaven when you die. That's called the intermediate state for a reason. We believe salvation is the resurrection of the body and life everlasting. That means whatever confusions our body has, whatever amputations we've had, whatever mental disorders our brain has had, that's going to be removed, but not anything that belongs to our bodies themselves. And once people, I don't know, I just think that when you hear it again and again and again, that your body doesn't tell you who you are. It has nothing to do with the real you. We're in Gnostic territory then.
Hmm. Well, there would be some people, I would think, who would say, well, there might be somebody who's born with non-functioning eardrums who can have a cochlear implant. We know we're created to be able to hear. So why couldn't it be the case that you have somebody who's born in the wrong body
Yeah.
for them?
Yeah, this is beyond my expertise. Just I would say theologically that there's a difference between being male and female and having sight and not having sight, or being able to hear and not being able to hear. And so you can repair these things without violating the nature of who you are. There may be exceptions. I'm not. I think you have to have conversations, as you have, conversations with the medical science that's out there, and really understand the issues, wider issues that are involved in this. I definitely don't make any hard and fast statements about there being any exceptions to what I'm talking about here. Nor am I. I don't want to say that everybody who has gender dysphoria, for Pete's sake, is a Gnostic.
Right.
I simply want to say we need to do a better job as Christians of talking about the body in ways that really valorize creation. Not just we're not just critical of people who want to do things that we think are morally wrong. We want to help them understand what God made right. And that is the beauty of our bodies. In all their confusion, in all their disarray, in all their brokenness, the goodness of our created flesh. Christianity has a unique take on the nature of God, the nature of creation, the nature of humans, and their destiny. A unique take. And I fear that we're focusing so much on the moral and political aftershocks, the downstream issues that uh, we're not really preparing even the next generation of Christians to be able to answer questions when people say my real self is in here.
Yeah.
My body is just a kind of a recalcitrant material canvas.
I'm reading a book right now by Ray Kurzweil,
Yeah.
the scientist, futurist who's predicted every advance in technology. He wrote a book called The Singularity is Near, talking
Mhm.
about AI long before anybody was thinking about AI in the general public. And now he has a sequel called The Singularity is Nearer.
Just
And
got it.
you just got it, yeah,
Yeah.
and he's talking through, sort of decade by decade, where the technology is going, and spends a lot of time talking with great certainty about the fact that children who are living today will be able to download their consciousness into the cloud, and death will effectively be, reversed. Does that
Mhm.
sound to you? And that there will be this evolving of human nature. Our phones are now part of us, he says. That's going to become more and more literally true as we go, and we will merge into the next step of
Mhm.
evolution, which actually transcends death. This
Mhm.
sounds really close to some aspects of occultism and other kinds of ways of thinking about transcending the body and my real me, except that it's the sense that my real me, my real self is data,
Right.
it's information.
Right. Yeah, Yuval Noah Harari is another really interesting person on this topic. And again, he speaks also with great certainty about what's coming. And you read it and you say, you really don't believe that our limitedness is good.
Hmm,
This is a typical Gnostic attitude that all bonds, all fetters on the soul, consciousness, must be broken. Instead of God becoming man to save us and restore us to true humanity, we want to rise up out of our humanity and become God. And doesn't that go back all the way
yeah.
to Genesis 3?
There was a documentary done on Kurzweil, and the very last scene, it's probably been 15 years since I watched it, and it's embedded in my mind. The very last scene is the interviewer asking Kurzweil, "Do you believe there's a God?" And his answer was, "Not yet."
Huh.
End of movie. And it seemed to me that was about as close to Genesis 3 as I could imagine, an
Yeah.
answer, being. I
Yeah.
wonder when it comes to if you think about the way, for instance, Paul talked to the Athenians, speaking in ways to confront directly and indirectly all of these influences that were philosophical and cultural influences on them. How would you advise that we as Christians talk to people who are spiritual but not religious if we're talking to them about the gospel?
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is often you will have people who will start with do you know that you're going to go to heaven when you die, or some question like that, that is completely alien to the sort of mindset that's here. Where would you what sorts of ways would you get at that these kind of ideas about the real self and about what it means to be spiritual from a
Mhm.
Christian perspective?
Boy, it is so hard. I've been thinking about that quite a lot, especially with my students. And what I'm trying to do here first is understand the issue, how we got here. That's what these 3 volumes are all about. Just my little journey trying to understand, come to grips with what is this phenomenon? How did we get here? And then I want to really focus on now how do we talk to people, because I'm I'll be honest, I'm flummoxed. It's very difficult to talk to someone who doesn't believe that there are any answers. It's easy to talk to an atheist. It's easy to talk to a committed Muslim, so forth. But it's very difficult to talk to someone who is equally confident, absolutely dogmatic, but feet firmly planted in midair. Those are tough conversations because here's the first thing I would encourage people to ask questions. First, ask questions where they are coming from. A lot of times people will reveal they haven't really thought it through as they're trying to answer the question, and that might help them realize they're kind of confused about it, or haven't really given it enough thought. But then I think also here's what it comes down to. A God who created you, made you for himself, against whom you've rebelled, which means you've chosen non-existence. You've chosen to turn away from the good, the true, and the beautiful. He has assumed your humanity in order to save it and restore it and glorify it. He will make us as gods. We tried that on our own and it didn't work. But he's going to raise us in Christ to now, if you have a force, can that force, yeah, that force can't judge you, but can that force save you
Or love you?
or love you? You say there's a kind of a love that oozes throughout the universe. Well, if it's not personal, then what does it mean to say that it has agency enough to love? It's a kind of unconscious force in the world. That's not, it's incapable of loving. So I think maybe to focus, get people to think about what they're actually saying, not just blurting out, but what they're actually trying to communicate, and then show them the different paradigm that Christianity is. I think we're going to have to work on this because a lot of people out there, as you know, Russell, have a very distorted view of Christianity from Christians.
Yeah.
And the first thing we have to do is help younger generations in the church to understand not just the great doctrines of the faith, but the pre-understandings, the presuppositions that undergird those views and how they really touch our lives, our hearts, our desires. What do you really desire? What do you really want out of the next 30 years? Whatever we desire the most, we worship. And so I don't think we do that enough. I don't think that we focus enough on transcendent desires as well as transcendent beliefs and doctrines.
Mm.
That's one place for us to really, I think, to tie it to issues like the body, the importance of the body, and respect for the body, respect for the dead, respect for the resurrection of the dead, respect for God's good purposes for this world. It's not it's not the late great planet Earth. It's a different story than that. It's a good one.
I was thinking a while back. It seems to me that a lot of what we're doing as Christians in terms of apologetics is about 15 years out of date because we're debating Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and
Yep.
New Atheism. When there was a study done in Iceland, one of the most secular places on planet Earth, that showed the mind-blowing percentage of people who believe in elves in Iceland. And you go in and they look at it, and for some of them, it's kind of a cultural thing. We're Icelandic, and so we pretend to believe in elves. But for a lot of other people, it's really an animism, an idea that there are these spirits that are at work in the world.
Mhm.
And as with every other error, that's partly right. There is a spiritual reality that is more than just can be seen, and it
Mhm.
seems to me that we've been embarrassed sometimes, at least one wing of Christianity, embarrassed about the way that the Bible talks about demonic spirits and
Yep.
the elemental powers of this age, and kind of think, well, we'll tell you about the weird stuff later. But that's actually to be able to say there's a reason that you really do have these intuitions that there's more to this world than rocks and dirt. It
Great
seems
point.
that takes a long time for us to learn.
Yeah, principalities and powers, and and in different ages and in different cultures, a different apologetic is needed. So you have Paul writing to the Colossians about not believing in this, that you're oppressed by these forces, these stoicheia to cosmo, these elementary principles of the world. Karma would be an example of that. Jesus broke karma. He took on whatever bad karma I gave out. He's broken the power of fear from
Mm,
these powers and principalities. That underscores the Christus Victor view of the atonement, for example, Christ the victor over the powers, including death. That, of course, can't be true unless he nailed our sins to the cross. So also the substitutionary atonement. But Paul puts those together to the Colossians because they especially are under the fear of these, this Greek philosophy. And that's probably going to be an apologetic we have to think more about today than talking to people who have read Dawkins. 9% of American adults claim to be atheists, and about 90% of our apologetics is directed to that 9%.
mm. Last question. You're on a desert island for the rest of your life. Your memory is going to be hazy and is going to get hazier. So a lot of things you've memorized are
I
going
think
to
I've been in a desert island then for a while.
as time goes on. And you could choose 5 books of the Bible
Mm,
to be with you on that desert island for the rest of your life,
mhm,
whether you keep your memory or not. What
mm.
are you choosing?
Well, Romans is a not is dead giveaway. I think also Revelation,
Hmm.
Job, Genesis, and Isaiah.
Why Job?
My third week into this, I'm gonna need to hear about, misery loves company.
Michael Horton is the author of the very new book, Shaman and Sage: The Roots of Spiritual but Not Religious in Antiquity. As I said when we came on, I've been benefiting from your teaching and wisdom and ministry for all of my adult life. And so it's really fun and an honor to get to talk to you. Thanks for being with
Uh,
us today.
Thank you, Russell. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the work that you're doing.
I have a friend who's an atheist, and a really rationalist atheist who really does believe only in material reality and the things that can be uh, experienced through the senses to be believed. And he and I've talked a lot about God and about the gospel and about Jesus. And I remember one week I wrote in my newsletter about the devil and about what spiritual warfare is and isn't. And my friend was flummoxed. And he said to me later, "You actually believe in the devil?" And I found that striking because I said, "Well, I mean, I believe in God, and I believe in the resurrection from the dead." And he said, "Yeah, but I just didn't know it would get that weird." And I think about him all the time because in that conversation with Mike Horton, it really does seem that we have trained ourselves to be able to talk to already Christian people in the subculture. That's always been the case. But also to speak to the kind of person who doesn't believe in anything, but not really able to speak to the increasingly large number of people who are believing in almost everything. And a lot of what we need to do, it seems, is to go back to what Mike was talking about with the way that Paul talked to the Colossians about the freedom from the elemental spirits of the world, the spiritual but not religious person who is checking a horoscope every day or who believes that his or her life is directed by karma is in need of freedom. The scientist who believes that by uploading his consciousness into the cloud, he can somehow avoid death is in need of freedom. And of course, that's what the gospel brings. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. This is Russell Moore. We'll see you next time.
If you enjoy The Russell Moore Show, take a second to share this episode with a friend or leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. The Russell Moore Show is a production of Christianity Today. Executive producers are Eric Petrick, Russell Moore, and Mike Cosper. Host is Russell Moore. Produced by Ashley Hales. Associate producers are Abby Perry and Mackenzie Hill. Director of Operations for CT Media is Matt Stevens. Audio engineering provided by Dan Phelps. Video producer is Abby Egan. And the theme song for The Russell Moore Show is Dusty Delta Day by Lennon Hutton.